Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Welcome back to another weekend of, or week of the race previews. We have just finished up with the Belgian Grand Prix last week out. We have back-to-back race weekends, and we're going to be heading to the Hungarian Grand Prix. But first, let's take a look and a little chat about what we saw in the Belgian GP as really just getting our first laps and feeling out how it goes, and already under attack we'll be. But as you know, sprint race weekend in Belgium last time out, so a couple extra things to talk about. We're going to try and go a little deep there and keep it a little more concise than we did last time. I think the last episode ran a little bit too long. It got a little too much into here's exactly what every team did, rather than here's my opinions on what we saw on the race weekend. So, of course, we will start at the top of the grid, as we always do. And a 1-2 finish for the McLaren team. And it was basically the exact kind of weekend that Oscar Piastri would look for. At this stage of the season, considering where Max Verstappen is on points, it's less about, obviously, you want to be winning races and scoring the maximum amount of points. But for Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris, it's going to be more just about who finishes ahead of who. Oscar got on the early front foot with his sprint pole position. Of course, that changed when the sprint race took place, where Verstappen went with that very gambling low downforce configuration. But Oscar finished ahead of Lando. Lando did get kind of a strike back at Oscar, though, on the Saturday Grand Prix qualifying. Managed to put it on pole for the Grand Prix, but had a bit of a Lando Norris moment. And I'll give him partial credit because Spa is such a hard track to retain pole position at. We saw it in the sprint race for Oscar. However, the thing that I will give some pause on it is the fact that Lando Norris didn't have to worry about getting off the start line in the Grand Prix. It was a rolling start in wet conditions, so he had more than enough opportunity to try and hold his young teammate off. However, Oscar Piastri got the move done on the way into Lake Como, where we're going now, down the Kemmel Straight. He got the jump right off the restart. Now, the interesting thing with the restart was I was really surprised with how early Lando Norris went for the restart. I mean, there's a heavy braking zone as far as the bus stop chicane goes. Usually you just kind of wait until you're exiting a slow corner, because then everybody else has to wait for you and they get delayed on their exit. But where he went really gave Oscar the opportunity to, even if he had been caught a little off guard by it, close right back up. And you saw how close he was through turn one and then up Eau Rouge Radion. The other thing that we heard is apparently Lando Norris had run out of battery deployment, and so I think this was also a factor of him going as early as he did. Because essentially for restarting the race, he would turn up his electrical deployment to use extra battery power. But I think he burned it all down this straight, most all of it, and therefore did not have a whole lot left in the battery when it came to actually defending. Now, on a restart, you're not allowed to overtake until passing the start-finish line. So I don't know that there was necessarily a reason for him to burn up the battery on the way to the start line and then have basically nothing left to defend with. I believe that kind of was a mistake potentially on Lando's part when it comes to it, because again, he got to choose when the race got restarted. He did get kind of an opportunity to make up for it at the end of the race. He, by virtue of Oscar kind of taking the lead early on, when it came time for the switch from wet to dry tires, Oscar obviously would have pit priority by being being the car that's leading. So he was able to be brought in on a fairly ideal lap. Lando Norris, I think, was too close for them to try to double stack. And as a result of them being called in on different laps, Lando having to essentially wait that extra lap, did cost him a good chunk of time. As we will see with some of the other cars on the grid who had to pit that lap later. But it did kind of force him to essentially take the different option of tire. Everybody that pit early and on those laps went with, just about everybody went with the medium tire. Lando Norris, obviously, he's not going to be able to do much after having lost the time and then put on the same kind of tire. So he ended up going on to the hard compound tire. Now, it does appear that the hard tire actually would have been the correct choice. It seemed the medium tire had to do quite a lot of management for those that went on to the medium. They had to manage the tire, and you could see it really in the closing stages. The amount of time that Lando was gaining on Oscar in the middle sector was, 6, 7, 8 tenths per lap as those medium tires fell off. So Lando did essentially end up on the correct, or I won't say correct, but the better tire strategy as a result of being second. Unfortunately, Lando made quite a number of mistakes. I think 3 mistakes that each cost him about a second every time. It did seem that on his final mistake, he kind of threw in the towel for a lap, because although he made the mistake down into turn 1, he also put up a sector time in sector 2 that was over a second off of all of his other laps. So it was kind of like he put his shoulders down and he just kind of drove and kind of pouted his way around that lap, because the very next lap he was back up to his normal lap times. He was kind of out of contention in that regard, but of course you never want to give up on a race, because Oscar could have made a mistake and had a half spin and gone off track, and if Lando was there to capitalize, then he could have. But it's definitely, a big weekend for Oscar in terms of the championship. I think it's starting to look, this was another example of Oscar kind of maintaining his head, the racecraft that he needed to do, and, didn't put a foot wrong when it mattered on Sunday. Whereas Lando definitely put several feet in the wrong places. Next up, we'll talk about Ferrari. So Ferrari brought a rear suspension upgrade to the Belgian Grand Prix. Usually, bringing upgrades is not particularly optimal on sprint weekends, because you have only the one practice session to try and get your test data in. It does look like that suspension upgrade was decent. It does look, though, that as we've kind of seen in other parts of the year, that Leclerc definitely got on track with that suspension upgrade a lot faster than Lewis did. He got to terms with it. Lewis had a real rough weekend when it came to qualifying, but he was building up the pace. I mean, he was knocked out in Q1 of the sprint, which was a pretty poor showing from him, just overall pace-wise. Getting knocked out in Q1 for the Grand Prix, the second set of qualifying, he was actually, he had put in a lap that was only a couple of, I want to say, less than a tenth off of what Leclerc had done. It was just the track limits time deletion that cost him. So he was definitely getting up to pace with Leclerc as the weekend went on. And he definitely showed some very good pace over the course of the Grand Prix. The other interesting thing that Ferrari did,
okay, they're out of this race,
that we don't often see many teams do, is they split their setup strategies on Sunday, or Saturday and Sunday, so for the Grand Prix, because of the weather. So it was very obvious early on that Hamilton was running a pretty high downforce configuration that would have been ideal for the more time that the race stayed wet, and Leclerc was running a lower downforce configuration, which helped when the track would dry up. As you can see, Lewis made up tons of positions in that wet time. He also made a very good, they called him in on perfect lap. So he managed to go from near the back of the grid to a decent points paying position. Leclerc in the opening stages had Max Verstappen all over him through the middle sector, but when he got onto the overtaking opportunities in the first and third sector, you can see that his straight line speed really kept him in contention and in that position. Then once the track dried out, it really wasn't much Verstappen could do to catch him. So interesting to see Ferrari split the setup strategy. Usually you don't see that from teams. They usually keep it pretty consistent across the board. And that is what we got for Ferrari. Who do we have next? Red Bull, as I am kind of looking away from my screen to look at my notes. Max Verstappen, I think, had the biggest swing across the weekend as far as how his car was set up. He had the tremendous lap to get up in the front row for the sprint. And with that very low downforce setup, worked out really well for him in the dry conditions of the sprint. He was able to get by Oscar Piastri on lap 1 using that supreme straight line speed. And no matter what, throughout that sprint race, Oscar just did not have the straight line pace down the even with DRS to catch and overtake Verstappen. So Verstappen really kind of showed the mold of what a good dry race strategy would be. However, he did significantly change the setup of the car after the sprint race. He did come much more back towards the pack, and definitely was carrying a lot more downforce. His middle sector times were climbing, and typically what you'll see around most tracks is a little more downforce you have on is typically better for outright lap time. You can typically go a little just faster per lap with a little extra downforce, but you're typically going to struggle with overtaking when the track does get dry if you're not going too little of downforce. So very interesting one for Max, and Leclerc did really well to keep Verstappen behind in that opening stage, because essentially Verstappen and Leclerc did the opposite of what Verstappen and Piastri did in the sprint, where it was Leclerc who kept Verstappen behind, even though Verstappen had the advantage in the wet. So very good driving from Leclerc. Still a decent performance from Max. On the other side of the garage, Yuki Tsunoda, I know it'll get lost in the results of the weekend, but he had one of his better race weekends overall. They did get the upgraded floor onto his car this week, and he definitely showed right from the outset quite a bit more confidence in the way that floor was performing for him. He even had a Q3 appearance. Unfortunately, in the Grand Prix, he was one of the drivers, even though he was running inside the points, one of the drivers that was left out just kind of a lap too long, and he really fell down that tight midfield and was not able to quite get back in the mix, because once the track dried out, it became very hard to overtake especially because on Sunday, nobody really went for that super low downforce. But, hopefully we can see Yuki continue to take that confidence that he had in that new floor. Hopefully that means he's getting a feeling for something in that car. Who do we have next? Next up is going to be Mercedes, which started the season as like the nailed on, easily second best car to drive and best, performing car. It's been struggling for several weeks now that Mercedes car has just not looked quite where it was. Kimi Antonelli is really struggling. I'm driving his car today just to try and send some good karma his way. He's really been struggling the past few races. The rain, I don't think, is helping him, but still has not really been a mix. But even George Russell, he's still managing to score some top 5 finishes. He did this week, but it's looking more like he's 5th because he's just barely hanging on to the lead of the chasing pack, rather than being at the tail end of the lead pack. So Mercedes still seems to be struggling with, figuring out this ground effect era car, this regulation set. So I think they are, at this point, just going to be real happy. They're searching for answers. They're just going to be really happy when 2026 hits and we move away from a ground effect focused car. And they get a chance to kind of re-figure it out, especially considering the rumors that they've got a good engine in the pipeline. Who do we have next? Williams. They are a team that's had a real interesting weekend overall. Both of their drivers scored points, although only one per session. Carlos Sainz scored in the sprint race. Alex Albon scored in the Grand Prix. But the interesting thing and the inconsistent thing is, while one driver scored in a session, the other one was just nowhere to be found, like bottom 5. I think it was 15th and 16th were the two results for the other car. So it's really, really confusing. I mean, they seem to have a decent enough car at times. They are still kind of in that best of the rest position. But it very much is looking like, as they bring upgrades, they really need to try and get that car moving in the right direction. Otherwise, the chasing pack is going to start to catch up to them. So we'll see. They need to try and regain some of their early season form. After them on the list is the Racing Bulls, the RB team. And just like Williams, they did the same thing. They scored points in both sessions, but only one car. Difference being, Liam Lawson had a pretty strong weekend. He just missed out on point. He was a couple positions off the points in the sprint and scored the points in the Grand Prix. But overall, his pace looked very similar to Isaac Hadjar, and it's looking like he's really starting to regain his form and get that confidence back under his belt. So it's looking good for him. Isaac Hadjar still had the measure of Lawson in the qualifying sessions, but it looks like some kind of car issue is what relegated him to finishing dead last in the Grand Prix itself. That's not the button I wanted to hit. Apologies. Just trying to hit my radio button.
Okay, we can take you this lap.
But so, the RB team overall, barring that car issue aside, they're looking to be a pretty strong set of drivers in that one. And they're scoring good points. And if Williams doesn't, get their stuff kind of figured out, the Racing Bulls could be coming up the list pretty quick and getting involved with, the best of the rest fight. Sauber, Bortoleto is continuing to look like a pretty solid driver. Made Q3 and outperformed Nico Hulkenberg in both qualifying sessions, both race sessions. So, maybe a little bit of podium hangover for Nico Hulkenberg. Didn't quite replicate the massive performance that he had. And the other big thing for them is earlier this week, there was an announcement. I forgot the sponsor's name, but the Audi group announced that they've signed a title sponsor for the car next year. So even while the results are looking decent the last few weeks on track for Sauber, also just the 2026 prep for when that team goes over to becoming Audi owned, it looks like they're generating some really good momentum over there because drivers are driving pretty decently for the midfield, and Gabriel Bortoleto looks like he might be one of the best rookies on the grid. Let me just double check my notes, make sure I got everything for them. Yes, we do. Alpine, next car up in the list. So Alpine, we talked about how Gasly performs in the more chaotic races last week. And he turned in a good performance. Obviously not quite as crazy as it was last time out in Silverstone, but still managed to grab a point this weekend. On the flip side, Franco Colapinto continues to disappoint. He's just really not been anywhere in the realm of where we would expect him to need to be, especially considering he, took the seat of another driver.
George is in the pits. He's in the pits.
So it's really, really starting to look like the Alpine leadership pulled the plug on the Jack Doohan experiment way too soon to try and get Franco Colapinto in the car. I've got to believe it's money related because Franco Colapinto brings a lot of sponsorship dollars with him. But I can't imagine that, based on the results, that Franco Colapinto is any more the correct choice than Jack Doohan was. Also looks like we kind of chose the right tires, much like Lewis, who went just the right lap for our tire change, and we've made quite a lot of ground. Next up, Haas. Haas scored points again this weekend. Not in the Grand Prix, but they did get a double points finish in the sprint, which was a solid result for Behrman and Ocon, which I think would have given them some real hope for Sunday, but it seems the team just did not handle the rain very well. Ollie Behrman was just outside the points, but much like Yuki Tsunoda, they left Esteban Ocon out for too long. They pitted him the same lap as Tsunoda, which really cost them a handful of positions and any real shot at going for the points. Although the team continues to just kind of be in the mix at the border areas of the points, that P8 to P12 area. And if Haas can keep up that kind of run of form, they will definitely be putting who's it ahead of them? Alpine at risk, who's really just riding on Gasly's big result, and also maybe even start moving up the way. I think catching Williams is a little bit of a reach potentially, and I think RB has the chance to start working his way up there. But you never know. We're only a little over halfway through the season now, so it definitely could get them out of the bottom three teams. And the last team to talk about on the grid, Aston Martin, was very, very anonymous this weekend. Not a lot going on for them. They did manage to give Fernando Alonso the same pit stop lap as Lewis Hamilton, which was the earliest anybody went onto the dries. He made a couple of positions out of it, but it was still not enough to get that Aston Martin car anywhere near the points. And it's really starting to look like if Aston Martin doesn't kind of figure out what's going on with that car. I mean, they've got Adrian Newey behind. Maybe Adrian is 100% focused on the 2026 car at this point. Have they just kind of punted on whatever's left of this season? But if they can't really get that car moving in the right direction, Aston is very much in danger of slipping back towards the P9, P10 in the constructors area, which is absolutely not where you want to be. But that'll kind of bring to a close the talk of the Belgian Grand Prix. Obviously, the weather made it interesting. I think the FIA missed the mark a bit. They shortened the DRS zone at the Kemmel Straight. And I think they overdid it because we really did not see a lot of overtaking action on track after with the DRS. Obviously, the sprint was basically a procession aside from the first lap. So hopefully, a big part of that is probably the dirty air. We saw how much time Oscar would lose to Verstappen in the sprint coming out of Paul Frere at the start of the third sector. And that's a huge dirty air kind of situation. So hopefully the 2026 regs, dirty air will be less of an impact. I know there's real concerns about the engine getting down the Kemmel Straight at full power. I think there's going to be some serious problems with the engine derating early on. And we'll hope that, The spa that we know for good racing will hopefully be back. But right now, it was less than the greatest weekend. A lot of the excitement was on the timing sheets, especially with the prospect of Lando trying to catch up to Oscar on those new tires. But let's wrap up Belgium and let's head on over to where the next race is taking place, the Hungarian Grand Prix. All right, so here we are pulling our way into the pole position grid box for the Hungarian Grand Prix. You can see big long straight ahead of us, a decent overtaking opportunity down into turn one, some good slipstream. There's a little bit of undulation in the track. I think the back part of the grid is actually kind of launching a little bit on the uphill slope, whereas here we're kind of on the flat. So look for the pole position car, who does start on what is the clean side of the track where the normal racing line is. They're going to want to get over and defend and make sure that they cover off the P2 car as early as they can. Typically, you see them move straight to this pit wall. And then it's a matter of swinging out and getting on the brakes for turn one. Very tight little hairpin, kind of crests the hill, and you see some lockups on the way down into turn one as you work your way then out onto the next path. It's a good opportunity to go side by side through turn one. It's a wide enough track. And there's usually a good run down here into this long left-handed sweep. You're hard on the brakes, and then you're on this kind of awkward, slightly off-camber, long left-handed corner. So especially as you get out towards the outside, really tough to keep the car on track if you're trying to go around the outside. But, of course, if you can keep the car there legally, you get this really cool little fast right-hand switchback. Unfortunately, if you're looking for great side-by-side racing after the Belgian Grand Prix, Hungary is typically not your prime opportunity for it. Because once you get through turn 4 and on your way up the hill to turn 5, it's very, very much single file because you have this basically blind crest, very fast left-hander, very narrow part of the track as well. And then you're sweeping across into this long uphill right-hander. So typically you're going to find cars going single file through here. If you can get a good tire offset, you may have an opportunity to launch off the corner and then go late on the brakes as you get to this awkward chicane. Now in real life, there's not these raised upper inside curbs of the chicane, so you can see people take more of the apex of these curbs. They'll get closer to these orange dots, the sausage curbs there. But again, most of the Hungarian track, not a lot of opportunity to overtake. You now have this very quick little left, right combination. And this final right-hander here is a fun one to watch in qualifying because you will see them take lots of speed through this corner, tracking right out. Occasionally, again, it's like all going to come down to tire advantage. You might get a move down into this kind of slower right-hander. So you get the car rotated in for, but otherwise you can see very narrow track overall. Nickname is Monaco without the walls. I don't know that that's necessarily super accurate, but the other thing that makes this track very tough to overtake on, of course, is this is a good medium speed kind of long right-hander. So a lot of dirty air generated coming around this corner as you head on to the two DRS zones, the only DRS zones on this track. One comes down the pit straight here, and the other is on its way between turns 1, 2, and 3. So we'll pick up the pace, and you can see kind of how the track looks at higher speed as I miss the apex by a mile. But here's our second DRS zone. You can get a bit of a run if you go for the cutback into turn 1, because you can straight line your exit and then utilize the DRS to help it out. But here's that quick right-hander turn 4, and now you're up the hill. And let's see if I can keep this one on track. And no, we've actually gone just a little wide. So another thing to keep an eye out for in qualifying is track limits there. But it is definitely a tricky track to navigate, and is one that definitely can chew up the tires. So, speaking of the tires, and tire strategy. Last year was a pretty nailed-on two-stop for everybody. Mixture of mediums and hards. The soft tire really did not play much of a factor in the Grand Prix, not surprisingly. Especially when you've got two stops, the softs are not typically going to be involved. It is the softest, well, almost softest of the range because the C6 is kind of a special occasion tire. But it is the C3, C4, C5 combination. So they are pretty high deg tires. That's what they used last year. It's what they are bringing again this year. So I would expect that the two-stop is going to be very much in the mix. And of course, because of the high degradation of this track, the undercut was actually quite powerful last year. To the tune of about 2.5 seconds of gained time by going for the undercut. So we will see teams kind of making that decision to go for the stop early, make up time on the undercut, and it's going to, bite them in the backside later. That said, I think with how heavy the dirty air effect is this year compared to last year even, I think you'll see pretty early stops. Overtaking is going to be very difficult around here. And so there's definitely, it's going to be an important qualifying day for the teams. As far as things to look out for across the grid, obviously this was the site last year of Oscar Piastri's first win and a situation that made a McLaren 1-2 a very unpleasurable result because they had they pitted Lando to undercut Oscar even though there was no reason to do it, and then had the whole argument with Lando about swapping the positions back after doing it. And it made for some really interesting radio communications over the course of the day. Of course, Lewis Hamilton scored a podium last year in the Mercedes. Very famously, he had his, he was fighting a lot on track with Verstappen. It was one of the Verstappen sees red kind of races. He had some very choice communications with GP, and it all culminated in him absolutely sending it down the inside of turn one, locking up the front axles, and launching his car into an endo. I don't know how, after he hit Lewis Hamilton, which is Max's rear tires kind of launched over the back of Lewis's front tires because he was just not going to make the corner. I don't know how Lewis's car did not get damaged from that. It was real interesting. But we'll have to see how that goes. Obviously, the Red Bull, not such a great car. And we'll see if Ferrari's obviously got the new suspension. It's a standard, like a regular weekend. So maybe a little bit more time for to get dialed in. And it is, kind of a Lewis Hamilton track. He holds the track records for wins, podiums, just about if there's a track record around the Hungaroring, Lewis Hamilton is the one who holds it. So hope Lewis definitely goes well around this track. We'll see, a lot of his record streaks are getting broken being in the Ferrari, and not in a good way. So we'll see how he looks. I think really Saturday is going to be very, very important for him. Leclerc, of course, is still the form driver in the Ferrari, and he's looking good. And the other thing is Hungary, as far as the rookies go. Hungary is a track that they do visit in the junior formulas, so it's a track that hopefully some of these rookies should have some familiarity and experience with. I don't know at this point what the weather forecast is looking like, but we will have to wait and see. But thank you all for joining me. Look forward to the Hungarian Grand Prix. What times does the races and stuff actually take place? Is it like super early for us? Let's see. Not that bad. Okay. It's on the earlier side, but it's not the worst. So look forward to seeing how those sessions all go. But thank you all for joining me. I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.